Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, which is a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Dr. Devorah Heitner and Heidi Stevens. Thanks for joining us tonight. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of nearly 300 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Dr. Devorah Heitner is the authority parents turn to for empowering advice on raising resilient and kind kids in our always connected world. She's the author of Growing Up in Public, Coming of Age in a Digital World, and Screenwise, Helping Kids Thrive and Survive in Their Digital World. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and CNN Opinion. She has a Ph.D. in Media Technology and Society from Northwestern University and has taught at DePaul University and Northwestern. Joining her is Heidi Stevens, a Chicago-based writer and the creative director of Parent Nation, an initiative of the University of Chicago's TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health, which works to provide parents, caregivers, and communities the knowledge and tools to optimize foundational brain development in all children. Prior to joining the U of C, Heidi worked at the Chicago Tribune for 23 years, where she wrote a daily column called Balancing Act, now a nationally syndicated weekly column. Heidi has served on the FAN board of directors since September of 2021, and we love having her. And now let's welcome Dr. Devorah Heitner and Heidi Stevens.
Thank you. Hi.
How are you?
It's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you. So those of you who don't know, Devorah and I got to hang out at Lit Fest this summer on the same day as the Bears-Packers home opener. So that was a little bit of pressure. I feel like we performed better than the Bears.
We definitely performed better than the Bears.
The low bar, but we cleared it. So yes. I'm so glad we're going to talk again tonight. This is such a great book, and it does such a good job of helping parents, but really all adults, I think, who have kids in their lives, help those kids, tweens and teens especially, navigate, you name it, boundaries, identity, privacy, reputation, kind of all of it really in this very digital, often unforgiving world. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for being here to talk to us about it.
Thank you.
Your book opens with a statement that I really like, and I think it's a great one for setting the tone for tonight's talk. And it's this: you say kids feel watched but not seen. So what do you mean by that? And I guess more importantly, what do you want us to take away from that?
Well, kids feel very surveilled, right? Kids have QR codes where they're scanning into different parts of their high school buildings, so their locations are being tracked. Parents may be tracking them on Life 360 or Find My Phone. Their grades are being tracked. Their peers can post about them, and many of them have opted into Snapchat, which is then the default on Snapchat unless you go into ghost mode, as it's tracking your location and showing it to everyone you're connected to. So there's just a lot of surveillance going on. And so kids feel very much like they can get in trouble. They can be seen doing the wrong thing. They can get caught. They can get canceled by their friend group for, saying they're in one place and it turns out they were in another. So there's all of that pressure on them, but they don't necessarily feel like all of that watching leads to people understanding them. Right? Whether it's their parents or their schools that are surveilling them, or even their friends, it doesn't necessarily make them feel more connected, more understood as a human being in their full dimensionality and complexity. Like, we all are complex. And so a lot of the advice, especially in the early days of kind of like digital citizenship curricula, was to have a personal brand. And I really push back on that in this book. I think all of us deserve to be more complex and individual, unique people, and not have a personal brand.
That's super interesting. Yeah. So just knowing, which Starbucks your kid checked into that day, or which party they ended up going to, and if it was the one they told you, that doesn't necessarily tell you how that experience went for them, right? Or what they went through to get there, or how they felt once they were there. But we sort of get lulled into this sense of like, okay, I know how their life's going because I see where they were physically.
But it's an illusion, right? Your kid could be at the library studying, they could be at the library, vaping, right? Like, there's so many things kids can be doing in a certain location, and even reading their texts, which some parents feel like they're supposed to do. which is a huge violation from the kid's perspective in most cases. Like that was like the single most violating, like even more than location tracking. I did meet some kids who were like, okay, whatever, location tracking, it's not that big a deal. I met others who really didn't like it, but I didn't meet anyone who wanted their adults to read their texts. They found that incredibly violating and found it to be an incursion on their friends' privacy as well. But it's also true that you could read your kids' texts or their discords or whatever and still have no clue what's going on with them because they're not for you. And it would be such a specific slice of their lives, right? It's not the same as having a close relationship with them and talking with them, or even just observing them and seeing, oh, they seem a little down, or they seem like they're really jazzed about something, right? You can tell a lot more about how your kid is doing by just attending to them.
Well, because they can be performing in a text message just as much as they could be performing at the dinner table, right? I mean, they don't necessarily bring their whole true selves to a group chat or to a text with a girl they like, or right, like that could be performative and hiding something that they need help going through too, right?
And a lot of parents find that when they do read their kids' texts in particular, they're performing sometimes a negativity about the family that might read as really cool to the friends, but is not necessarily how they feel all the time. So parents will say, oh, I was devastated. My kid seemed to be having a good time on vacation, but all she could say to her boyfriend was it was boring. And my response is, of course, she's like fronting for the boyfriend who she maybe misses and wants to understand, like, oh, this time with my parents isn't as good as time with you. But that doesn't mean the entire vacation is a misery. I mean, we know that vacations with teenagers can have their miserable moments, but it's also possible that, you know, that hike where it seemed like everyone was having a great time actually was a great time, but later, you know, she might be performing a different experience to her boyfriend or to her friends. And that's why we shouldn't read the text.
Right.
Like that wasn't for you.
Right. So two things I want to say before we get into kind of the deeper discussion. One is I do want to be careful to say, and I genuinely believe and respect this, that everyone here tonight is bringing, you know, their own value system and their own knowledge of their kids', you know, unique personality and challenges. And so we're not trying to be prescriptive here, you know, do this, never do that. But I think it's a really timely conversation. And I think that all of the stuff that you're going to talk about can help us examine some of our own habits and help us come up with like really useful ways to think about these topics as we decide what our specific rules are going to be and what the expectations are in our house are going to be. So I just don't want people to feel like, oh, this is gonna be like, I can walk away with a checklist, never do this, always do this, I'm good, you know, or
I agree. And
you know, about my family, like this is very much like this is a framing of, you know, these topics, and it's not necessarily going to be prescriptive, and it's not going to necessarily apply to your kid because your kid might have challenges that another kid doesn't, or right. So I want to say that off the bat. And then I also want to say, if you could just talk to us a little bit about the process of writing this book. So you just talked a little bit about kids have told me that they feel this way or that way. So talk a little bit about who you talked to in the research and writing of this book, just so we know that for context.
And I do agree with that caveat that every family is facing unique challenges. And especially right now, I think that's really important. I just think when we're thinking about, you know, again, sort of being seen versus known or understood or being surveilled, right? I think it's really important to understand that even if we do surveil our kids using every possible technology, there's pieces that we're going to miss because those are the relationship pieces. And the concern I have is that the surveillance sort of software is marketing itself as like a replacement for that. And I don't think it can be as much as we wish there was. But the process was challenging. You know, I started the process a little bit before the pandemic began, but then I did a lot of the initial research and interviews on Zoom during the pandemic, and then was able to do some in-person conversations, thankfully, as well. But that was just unexpected. I mean, I remember talking with my literary agent about this book, and she was really excited about it. And that was right when lockdowns began. And I was planning to go to New York and meet with her in person. And she was like, well, let's wait a few weeks until this blows over. That was March 2020.
It'll be over by Easter.
Yeah. So we were kind of like hunkering down and waiting for that to end. And obviously talking with kids, you know, before, during, and we're not really after, but in this kind of later stage where we're back to a lot of things, has been eye-opening, but I think the pandemic was just an accelerator for a lot of trends that were already happening, like kids getting online younger, using social media younger, getting devices younger. I mean, all of those things were accelerated, but they were already happening. You know, I've been working on this topic and talking about this since at least 2010, and kids have been, you know, online in digital communities since that time. So I think certainly 2020, 2021 were accelerators though. And for some people, it was like pushing their kid into the deep end. And for families who are looking now and saying, wow, what have we done? I think this is an incredibly important moment to evaluate, like, what are the positive aspects of this for us? And what are the ways that we might want to make some shifts now that we kind of have had a few years to swim in the deep end?
Yeah, right. And you can always shift, right? I mean, I think that's something that we don't really hear often enough, but that you can calibrate as you go, and take, you know, kind of a hard look and say, like, is this working the way I've been doing it? And if not, let me think of a different way to do it. So thank you for that guidance. I mean, that's really big. So, okay, you have had a million conversations with parents and kids and educators, and you know, each of us here tonight have had our own. One that I have had over and over, maybe like a million times, with, you know, with different parents, friends, readers, whatever, across the board. Essentially, like, you know, I feel a little funny, like a little big brother-ish, you know, tracking my kid, life 360ing my kid or whatever. I also just need to know that they arrived at their destination safely, right? Like they're taking the L, or that they say that they are where they say they are, that they didn't forget to go to the tutor after school. So like, how do you help parents balance that those dueling priorities? You know, like, I don't want to be creepy and get my kid acclimated to being constantly surveilled. And I also, like, I worry that they didn't make it off the blue line where they needed to be.
I mean, some of it is being able to actually accept that discomfort that our parents had to accept, right? That whether it was, you know, giving me the car when I was 16 to drive out of state to college, and my parents had to accept that, you know, I had learned how to change a tire. I had driven my dad to my college the weekend before to make sure he was convinced basically that I could do it. But in the end, they had to tolerate that discomfort of the 3 hours that I was on the road until I called them. Right. And we may have to tolerate. I think a lot of us struggle, including myself. I'm a very anxious parent, struggle to tolerate that. And sometimes we'll get our kids a device the first time we run late to pick them up, you know, and think about how many times, if any of you are Gen X like I am, or older than that, how many times you waited around maybe a really long time, or unexpectedly had to borrow a dime to call someone because like no one did show up to pick you up, and like, here you are, you live to tell the tale. And I don't want to sort of make light of the stress that might have caused in your life at the time, but the ingenuity and the you know, you survived it. And so I think sometimes parents rush and get their kids a phone, you know, the very first time they're 10 minutes late to pick up their kids. And I think we have to kind of work with our kids to navigate, like, okay, so if I was running late because I got into traffic or I had to pick up your sibling, like, how, you know, what could you do with that time? Or how could you manage yourself? Or what would be a safe place for you to wait for me? And just work through that. And I think all of us have gotten less good at tolerating ambiguity. And I think about my relationship with my partner, who I've been with since before we had phones. And, you know, we used to only call each other from work if we were going to be super late, not like I'm going to be 11 minutes late, you know, but like, I'm going to be so late that you should go to bed and not wait up for me. And now it's like, oh, I got on the 6:07 and not the 6:02. I'm going to text you and let you know about that 4-minute change to my ETA.
Right.
And I think that, that we can try to tolerate that. That difference and push in our kids the ability to tolerate a little bit of that also from their friends, right? So sometimes I'll work with kids on kind of how can you manage when you can't reach someone? What are your options, or what could they be doing? Because we all got so accustomed to be able to reach each other all the time, especially in these last 3 years. And kids struggle to navigate that. So just helping them kind of manage, okay, well, if I can't reach my friend, what could they be doing? Oh, they could be eating dinner. Okay, they could be sleeping, right? Like there's reasons. Just because the devices connect all the time doesn't mean humans are available all the time.
Yeah. Oof, that's a really good point. I like that. Here's another one I hear a lot from parents. this just came up at a girls' night out dinner with about a dozen of us last Friday. So someone will say, you know, my kid, and it might have been in a search for community, or it might have been a bid for attention, or it might have been shock value for some reason or other, is sharing something online that I'm afraid is going to make life harder for them, right? Like, do you have to discuss your sexual identity? Do you have to talk about your anxiety diagnosis? Do you have to post a photo of yourself in like those tiny shorts? Aren't you just opening yourself up for teasing, ostracizing, shaming? Like, why do they do that? So what do you say to parents who have that? Like, why are they doing this?
Well, there's a range. I mean, even the situations you described are a range. So like, come back to the outfit in a minute, but let's talk about
it's almost two different.
disclosure.
I mean, yeah, it's a lot of different things in there, but like that feeling of like, why are they doing this? It's just going to make life harder. Like, how should we think about that?
This generation's sense of boundaries is different than previous generations. And the good news about that is the stigma attached to some forms of sharing may be lower in their social circles than we think. And this is because the kids have evolved, and they're, you know, like this is a way that they are better than we were. So when I was a teenager, I saw a therapist, and I didn't even have to be told, Devorah, don't tell anyone. Like, no one ever explicitly said this to me. It was just the 90s. And I kind of just got the memo from the culture that seeing a therapist wasn't something you told your friends or anyone outside of your family. Like, it was just so clear to me that, again, I didn't have to be explicitly advised not to share. I just would tell my friends I had a shift at work or whatever. And the fact that kids could now say to their friends, I got to bounce, I have therapy, is amazing. And it is a way
I have a ride to therapy. Are you? Yeah. Like, it's just,
it's so much better. And at the same time, I totally respect the rights of kids or adults who want to keep their mental health private. So I also think it's fine if you want to just be like, I got to go. You don't have to tell people you're in therapy. But the fact that your kids' friends would probably be like, okay, see you later. Or, oh yeah, great, I'll remember that on Tuesdays. I see my therapist on Thursdays or whatever, is such a better world than we lived in. And the same thing for kids who are sharing about their gender identities. If your kid is putting out there that they have pronouns that they want folks to know about, or if they're putting out their sexual orientation, first of all, be pretty sure that they've thought about it first, that it wasn't just a spontaneous, like, I'm just going to share this with everyone on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. Like, if your kid is updating their social media bio with, you know, a new pride flag, with pronouns, with something, a disclosure about mental health or survivorship, they probably gave that some significant thought. They probably also know who they're connected to and whether that's a supportive community. Kids are not generally just kind of willy-nilly, you know, disclosing without considering those things. And one of the young people I talked to for the Washington Post article about kids' disclosures was saying why she chose to disclose in Instagram, for example, and not TikTok, right? And that TikTok felt like a more vulnerable place to come out and more problematic because of just the way the algorithm works, and that Instagram felt safer. So that was a lot of thought. And so we have to look at the fact that our kids are on the front lines of a change where being out as LGBTQ+, being out as non-binary, being out as neurodiverse, like having ADHD or, you know, ASD or other things, like all of that is, we're living in a different world. And as one mom said to me, who I talked to for the book, it's great that they're busting the stigmas, but does it have to be my kid on the front lines? And I also feel for parents who worry. Sure. Because we do see the stigmas, and we do see, and some of these identities are frankly more stigmatized than others. So there's a range of experiences that kids might have, but they are changing the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And better for us to help them change the world than make them feel like they need to change to fit into a world that frankly needs changing. So I love that permission and also kind of roadmap you're offering. And also I understand parents who feel like I just don't want, and that range that you talk about also varies based on your geography, right? Or your specific school within your geography. Like, it's a million variables. So, you know, none of this should feel, you know, shaming to parents who feel like, well, hey, I just would rather they didn't share that. Like, we get why. But I appreciate your guidance on that.
And the kids get why too. And sometimes their online peers might not be in their geolocation too. So you see kids, and especially we see this with queer kids a lot, where, if they're in a supportive environment locally, great, but not all kids are, but they may have a supportive community on Discord or a supportive community in another online space, and that might not be geolocated. And it makes us nervous, even, sort of this many years into the internet, we got nervous about our kids having friends that they don't know in, real life. But
Right.
so many of my professional and personal connections are people that I've first met on the internet, that I think we can't discount that can be a positive place of support and community for our kids and affinity.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder. Okay, you said algorithms earlier. I'm going to put a pin in that because I have an algorithm question, but I want to stay on the shorts question for a second, because I love in the book when you tell us not to keep using college sort of as the boogeyman. Like, if you post that photo, you're not going to ever get into Stanford. Like you say, colleges really aren't stalking your kids online. Like, every once in a while, maybe there's an exception where, a college admissions officer really does go through some kids' Snapchat, but probably not. So that's not an accurate statement necessarily, but it's also, the focus is in the wrong place, right? Like, the threat of getting caught by an authority figure shouldn't really be the focus that we're emphasizing on with our kids, right? It should be the opportunity to talk to your kids about conducting themselves in a way that serves them well and that represents who they want to be in the world and who they want to be in their community. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we use that threat of, like, you won't get into Northwestern, you won't get into Princeton, you won't get into whatever, because we want to extend our authority. And by like 6th, 7th, 8th grade, a lot of kids are, sort of backing away from our authority, and, we don't know everything anymore. And that's just when they're getting social media and just starting to scare us about we start noticing a reputation threat. And it makes sense to be concerned, by the way. I want to validate that for parents. We're giving kids powerful communication devices when they're in middle school. We went to middle school. We know exactly how impulsive and momentarily cruel and thoughtless middle schoolers can be. One of the kind of more amusing things, and again, I totally respect why some people want to wait until 8th, but like for a phone, and I totally understand that. But at the same time, 8th grade for many people is like the nadir of their judgment for their entire life. Like, let the 5th graders rule the world, please. Like, the 8th graders are not, and I say this very lovingly, I have an 8th grader who was pretty awesome in 8th grade, but there were still moments where I was like, oh yeah, 8th grade, not the pinnacle of judgment. Right. So I just want to say that, because we're giving these kids these powerful devices. So I understand why people want to say you won't get into Princeton if you post that. But it's not true. They are absolutely not looking at your middle school group text. They're not trying to figure out which Maya you are on Snapchat. They are not able to go all NSA. You got your 7 minutes if you pass like these 90 hurdles at these highly rejective schools to even get the 7 minutes. If you're not rejected before you get to that point, they've got 7 minutes. They're reading your essay, they're looking at your transcript, and then, whatever. They're not going all deep dive. If your child is a recruited athlete and they send links, like say their softball stats are on Twitter, then yes, they might look at that link. And if the rest of your Twitter is promoting like a fight club or something terrible, that might not be good for your admissions. But in general, they are not doing that deep dive. So it's not true. But the more important reason, Heidi, and I'm so glad you brought this up, is that we're telling kids, don't get caught. If we say don't post the jokes about genocide because some kids got rescinded from Harvard for that, we're making it about getting rescinded from Harvard and why did those kids think genocide was funny?
That's right.
Like, let's go back to that piece. So we really want to focus on character and not just consequences, and have the deeper conversation, which is the do no harm conversation, which is if you're not sure why that meme is funny, do not share it, do not like it, do not amplify it. If that content on the internet, whether it's a social post, a meme, anything else, if it's harmful to an individual, a group of people, don't share it, don't amplify it, don't like it, don't create something that's harmful, don't make a Google Doc about why, this one teacher isn't very, very good person, right? That's not a way to deal with things. And the reason we need to emphasize that is most people will not get caught. So we really have to focus on do no harm and not don't get caught, right? Because kids will see other kids doing horrendous things and not getting caught.
Right. Yeah. And don't not do it because if you get caught, it's not going to end well for you. Don't do it because that's not the kind of human you want to be in this one precious life you get, right?
And the flip side is when kids do mess up, I want us to behave in ways that let them move forward and repair. If you see something, say something, but say something to the person. If I see a friend post on her personal Facebook a rant about her boss that I think might get her fired, I'll call her up and say, take it down. I don't screenshot it and send it to her work. We shouldn't be out there trying to gotcha people, and especially young people, especially young people. If you see a friend's kid posting something that you think they might regret and you have that kid's number, text them and say, I'm a little concerned. Maybe you want to take that down, at least pause and think for a second, right? And I have done that with young people in my own life where they've posted things that I could see in a different way. And you always want to say it in a really kind way with the benefit of the doubt. So there was a young person in my life who posted something that might have been a help service for high school students, but it also might have been a paper writing service. This is like pre-chat GPT.
Yeah.
Why in the world would I screenshot that and share that with others? I just wrote to the kid directly and said, I'm sure this isn't what you intend.
Right.
But I taught college and this could sound really bad. And I
Here's
don't want you to get in trouble. I think you should change the wording so it's very clear that you're not writing papers for people.
Yeah.
That's it. Moving on with my life.
Right. Set them up for success. Set them up for a second chance. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And we have so many opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
As adults, as educators, as people who care about kids. And it just wrecks me, honestly, when I see people, amplifying the mistake of other people's kids. And frankly, you have no idea what your kid may have done, especially when you're looking at screenshotting something from the group text, or your kid is even showing you a piece. You don't always know the role your own child may have played in the antecedent to that conflict. I mean, hopefully not, right? We all hope that our kids wouldn't do anything like that. But I just think we have to give all kids, especially, I think we shouldn't be in a gotcha culture with adults the same way we are either, but especially again with young people. Yeah, we just need to cultivate some grace and some ideas that we're teachers. And because when we tell kids there's no repair, we're potentially setting kids up at the most extreme to feel like their lives have no way forward and to think about ending their lives. That's what we've seen. That message of there's no repair, you've been shamed and you can't move forward.
Yeah,
that's where that can go.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So mentor more than monitor, and to use your phrasing. Okay, let's talk. I'm going to go back to the algorithm pin. Let's talk about small privacy versus big privacy. I think this is super fascinating. And you talk about how kids kind of immediately reflexively know that their privacy has been violated if their parents read their texts, like you brought up earlier, or, post their messy room photo on Facebook or whatever. That's an immediate, my privacy has been invaded. But big privacy is something that kind of more escapes their concern. And talk about what big privacy is and why we need to help our kids understand it.
Big privacy is the algorithm. It's how does TikTok know not just that you like cats, not just what color cats, but how many seconds you'll watch cats if they're with jazz versus with hip hop. They know everything. Mm-hmm. And especially TikTok, that is a really good algorithm. That's why so many teenagers have a hard time and adults have a hard time walking away. It's why over the course of my book research, it was the most frequently quit app. So I had very love and hate responses from kids about TikTok, and people find that algorithm to be very, very compelling and sticky. It's how Amazon knows you were thinking about a mattress. It's how Expedia seems to know you were thinking about a vacation. Some of it is it's so clear that they're surveilling us, right? Whether you're talking to Alexa or Siri and suddenly you've got a new ad. And kids are somewhat aware. I did talk to some kids who were intentionally manipulating their algorithm. One young woman was trying to make her algorithm more body positive. And so she was following more body positive influencers, clicking on products that she felt were more size inclusive to try to get more ads for things that she wanted to see, but also to drown out the things she didn't want to see. But many kids are just really enthralled with the convenience of the algorithm, and they're not thinking about the sort of big privacy pieces or, oh, put your name in here to enter, for this or that. It's oh, wait, do I want to be giving this person my name, my birth date, all of this information? So they are much more aware of what Dana Boyd has been talking about for many years, the contextual collapse of like, grandma can see my post, or my teacher can see my chat with my friends in Google Docs, because it's so easy to forget about that. And then when you remind, a sixth grader, like, oh, your teacher can see that, they're like, what?
Yeah.
But the algorithm is, it's a lot for all of us. I think a lot of us kind of like the convenience of it.
For sure. But what's the risk? Like why should they know that, clicking on that Instagram, content is going to affect what Instagram feeds them going forward? Why is that an important conversation to have with our kids?
I mean, the risk is that all of that metadata then becomes information about you that you can never get back. And I know like some of the privacy activists take a more extreme role in, like only using, I don't know, dumb phones, or, I mean, if you watch Battlestar Galactica, right, it's like the idea of like, never be on the network. Like, I don't personally take it to that level, but there is a lot of metadata going on, and there's risk. Or even Snapchat maps. Like, say your kid wants to be in Snapchat maps because she wants her friends to know where she is. Well, it's fun to have your friends know where you are, but anyone can see, or a lot of people who are connected to your friends can then see where you are. So if you have potentially an abusive partner at some point, they can see where you are. So there's just a lot of, you're giving up a lot of privacy to have that convenience and that, frankly, like sort of T value, the sort of gossip value of knowing where your friends are, and kind of the emotional intensity of that, which for me would be too much.
Yeah.
But that's the exchange, right? It's like, oh, it's fascinating to know where all my friends are. It's also maybe emotionally painful. And guess what? If I know where all my friends are, some of them might be at risk because I have that knowledge, or one of their, a non-custodial parent who's supposed to have a restraining order with that kid might be able to find out where they are, right? There's risks in it.
For sure. Yeah. And now I'm thinking about, we talked about this a little bit at LiveFest, but I'm thinking about the way we started this conversation off tonight about our kids feeling almost acclimated about being constantly surveilled, and just sort of what that does to our own internal red flag system. Like if you are with, a partner, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, even a friend who's kind of codependent and toxic, and what alarm bells might not go off because we're used to someone grabbing our phone from us and reading our text, or we're used to someone needing to know where we are every single second of the day. And so to suddenly be like 21 and have that happen, or 30 and have that happen, or 17 and have that happen, and for it to not feel icky and to have it feel normal, shrug. My parents did that to me. Like there's risk in that, right?
Absolutely. And I think we want to be enforcing boundaries and a consent-based culture at home, whether it's about asking kids before we share their picture, whether it's about every time an app asks us a question to think about, do they really need this information? Do we have to opt in to this? Is there any choice? Can I go on ghost mode and be in Snapchat, but not reveal my location? Can I turn my location off in Instagram, right? Just to not take those things for granted and teach kids to have those boundaries. And part of it is allowing them to have some privacy with us, right? Again, if we normalize that we need to know everything at all times, that can make it really hard for kids to recognize, like, wait, where does my edge end?
Right.
And so even experimenting, and that's going to maybe look different for an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old. And even a lot of us have our 20-year-olds still on our family phone plan. So I was just reading an article, addressing young adults, and they were talking about how to get your own phone plan. And one of the disadvantages of staying on parents' phone plans in people's 20s was parents can still track your location. And I was thinking, wow, that's a lot of location tracking, assuming if the 20-year-old is no longer even living at home, or, why would you track your 23-year-old? But it becomes a habit. And then it becomes hard to kind of back out from. So I think we've all been sold this as it's really good parenting, and we need to just, I agree that every family needs to make their own decisions, but I think we should make them with our eyes open, right? Just because the technology exists doesn't mean we should adopt it.
Yeah.
And if we adopt it, we need to be in conversation with our kids, with our co-parents. What are we using this for? What are the limits? When are we not going to use it?
Yeah. Okay. Sexting. Is this a topic that parents want to talk to you about or dread talking to you about? And is this a topic that kids want to talk to you about or dread talking to you about? And the answer obviously can be all the above, but it's a topic that needs to be talked about. Is it, what are we not talking about and why? And just sort of, what are you learning on that front when you're out in the community having conversations?
When I started working on growing up in public, I don't know that I intended a full chapter on sexting and sharing sexual images and nudes. And of course, kids don't call it that. They call it sending nudes or sending. But it was a lot of work to research because there are limits to how much I can ask kids about these practices. I don't want to see examples, obviously. I don't want to be looking at something that is technically child pornography. So a lot of my research came from really great research done at universities in this case, and some first-person narratives from kids and adults. So I did have some people talk to me about it, but there was a really great study with gay and bisexual identified boys, for example, out of England, that had some really great data. Anyway, sexting is a fascinating topic. The good news for parents who are hoping their kids will never do it, and I think it's fair to say that even sex positive parents who want to share up-to-date information with our kids about sex, who don't necessarily object to our kids at some point, even potentially before marriage, which is, I think, what, at age 32 right now is the average, or when are people getting married? I don't know what that stat is, but it's older than the age that a lot of people.
Not high school.
It's not high school, right? So there's a big gap potentially between when someone could be having, consensual partnered sex and when they might choose to get married. And at this point in society, and kids are waiting. We know from Jean Twenge and other people's research that young people are actually delaying sex a little bit, and sexting maybe filling some of that gap, which again, doesn't thrill us. And here's why it makes us concerned. Again, even for those who identify as sex positive or feel like they're okay with their kids at some point exploring sex, before they're 32, is that because there's so many social and privacy risks with sharing nudes and so many reputational risks. Now, we'll put aside the legal. I know I have some attorneys, I'm sure, on this Zoom who are like, Devorah, you haven't said legal yet. Yes, I know also that it's illegal. I think when we lead with that, just like if we lead with like
the boogeyman. Right.
Yeah, if we lead with that, we lose a lot of kids, because almost all kids by high school, if not sooner, will know a kid who has shared a nude or received a nude and did not go to jail.
Not in jail, exactly.
And frankly, I don't want to live in a world where teenagers consensually exchanging nudes do go to jail. So I think that's good, right? We don't want to live in that world. That's not a good world. But the social privacy and reputation risks are significant. So one of the people who was an amazing source for that chapter, Carrie Goldberg, who is an attorney who works mostly with young women, although also with men, who have experienced a phenomenon called revenge pornography or things related to that. Basically, she's talking about people whose nudes were shared non-consensually in a whole host of ways, whether they were blackmailed, whether they shared them initially consensually, and then they were shared beyond the initial audience. And what she found is the most vulnerable kids are the ones who can't talk to anyone about it. So the challenge with sexting is we don't want to scare our children and teenagers so much about it to be so negative that they can't come to us if they are in a situation where maybe they shared consensually with someone, or they shared with someone that they trusted and that person violated their trust, or maybe they were coerced and shared because they were coerced, or maybe they shared and it was very impulsive and they didn't think that hard about it and they thought this will be a really fun way to flirt, or it would be really outrageous, right? There's a huge range of reasons young people and adults send nudes or explicit images or pictures in their underpants, like a whole range of things. And the experience can be fine, right? Like two kids could, for example, exchange some nudes. They stay together for a while, maybe they break up, they erase the nudes, life goes on, they don't show it to anyone. And there's no more emotional risk to that than anything else they could do together while they're together, including, making out, having sex, etc., right? Writing each other poetry. There's risks to all those things emotionally. But the kids I'm concerned about, and adults, but especially young people, are when pictures get exchanged or pictures are shared beyond the initial intended recipient, and when they're used to harm someone intentionally, when they're used to threaten someone or coerce someone or to shame someone. And there's a differential price in 2023 reputationally for girls versus boys, even though we're in 2023. And there's also a lot of emotional manipulation. Someone was just sharing with me this week, like, oh, my daughter's boyfriend threatened suicide if she didn't share an image. That's incredibly manipulative.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously a huge red flag in a relationship, but for someone in their first relationship, they might not know to recognize that's a red flag until it's too late. And what you wouldn't want is for her to then be so embarrassed that she made this decision, which maybe wasn't a great decision, but was made under duress, to not be able to share that it happened. And when we see kids whose images have gone around get reputationally harmed, it's more often girls. When we see coercive images being shared like unbidden, it's more often boys. Again, I know not all our kids even identify with that binary, but one of the things that really dissuaded a lot of boys that I talked to since I've been on the road with the book is just that girls don't like it. Like if we can get that message into sex ed, like, hey, don't send girls pictures of your parts as a way to flirt, like non-consensually airdropping that onto her computer. She's not going to like that. And she might report you for harassment, right? Or at the least, she might not go out with you like that. Like a girl who might have considered you interesting before is going to take you off the list. And I think just letting boys know that is huge. And it might seem so obvious to adults, but it's not obvious. And then for the queer kids, are some special motivations and reasons that kids who identify as LGBTQ+ might send. And I think it's really profound to understand that almost all teenagers at some point, or certainly many, many teenagers, want to be seen as attractive, right? Even the ones who aren't ready to date yet, even the ones who aren't ready for sex, like many, many, many people want to be seen as attractive, as viable, right? As interesting. And that doesn't happen in high school for queer kids in the same way that it may happen for straight kids. And it doesn't happen for non-binary and trans kids as much or in the same way as it might happen for cisgender kids. And it's really important to have empathy for reasons then why queer kids might then be more interested in sending images in some cases, because that validation then becomes so important. And this is true even if your kid goes to an awesome high school with a great GSA and say there's 40 people in that GSA, and your kid is really tight friends with 25 of them or whatever, that might feel like those are their siblings. They can't date them, but they still might want someone to say they're really hot, but they're not going to get that in the same way as the straight kids do. And so sexting then becomes the way to get that. And it's so dicey. We worry so much about it. And in the end, if we could see it as another form of sexual exploration, I think we could have a much more developmentally appropriate conversation about it and be really clear with kids about risk. And then we could start to talk about harm reduction strategies.
Right. Respect, consent. Yeah. The actual topic underneath of it for sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Kind of taking a turn to a whole different topic. I'm conscious of the calendar right now, and a lot of parents and families are going through college admissions and that whole process. And I'm thinking about, I've talked about this a little bit, but there was that great essay in the Atlantic last year or earlier this year by Zach Gottlieb, imploring parents, please stop posting acceptance videos. Please stop posting videos of your kids sitting down at the computer and checking their email and saying, I got into, my top pick, or I got into my dream school, or I didn't get in, and what that feeds in the culture that is maybe not the healthiest for kids. So that's another way that we're sort of asking them to live in and grow up in public. And talk a little bit about where you fall on that topic, because it is tempting with all of the, social media channels at our disposal to share, like, hey, my kid got into, and in Chicago, it starts way earlier than college. Hey, my kid got into this selective enrollment high school. Hey, my kid got into gifted kindergarten. Hey, my kid got into, talk a little bit about, some considerations and questions we should be going through in our mind during those processes.
Absolutely. So ideally, kids have a lot of voice, and especially by senior year of high school, you're applying to college. At that point, your kid is, a young adult. they should have total control over what's shared about the process. And if they ask you not to share, I would absolutely respect that. I mean, I would respect that much sooner, but certainly, this is actually their future, their adult life. And the whole setup of senior year at so many high schools can feel like a lot of pressure. A lot of schools that I've worked with and that I'm familiar with have, senior Instagram accounts where it's like seniors 2024, and it'll have all the kids next spring in their sweatshirts of where they're going. And so that can make you feel like, say you're going to a 2-year college and living at home, or say you're going to work, or say you're in credit recovery, or you don't know what you're going to do. And those are all valid situations to be in. And many, many young people are, or you're, waiting to hear from trade school. There's so many reasons why that incredible pressure to sort of post a 4-year admission and a sweatshirt and a little flag and a major, like who knows what their major is senior year of high school, but whatever. Anyway, I digress because I see that too, like, oh, I'm going to this school for this, right? It's so much pressure. And kids that I talked to who felt the best about the process had plans with their close friend group about how to share. And this is one way where I think the kids are doing so much better than the adults.
Right.
Where these kids were talking about like, hey, I know I'm applying to some of the same schools as my friends. We have a deal where we're going to tell each other where we got in and when, and then they would take each other out to celebrate the rejections as well as the acceptances. And so I was with one young man when he actually found out he wasn't admitted to Northwestern. And he was like, I'm really looking forward to the ice cream sundaes my friends are going to buy me later. Like, and it felt very genuine.
Yeah.
It felt very much part of the experience of, and it was so great that his parents had not posted, because he didn't then have Uncle Ned being like, well, have you heard from Northwestern?
Right.
And so the kids are even seeing one another's visits on Snapchat. It's a really good reason to think about going on ghost mode when you go on those visits. It's like kind of nice to just go to Madison for the weekend and not have to come back on Monday and have everyone be like, so what did you think of UW-Madison? Like, maybe you don't want to talk about it.
Right. Right. Totally. It's interesting you brought up Uncle Ned, the fictional, or maybe he's real. I don't know. Maybe you have an Uncle Ned. But I think a lot of families feel pressure one way or the other on how to use social media based on the family, right? So like, well, that's how grandma wants to see photos, or like, I need to keep all my relatives live out of town. I need to keep them updated on whether she made the dance team or not. So like, that's how we do it. It's just faster. I don't have to send 16 texts. I can post one thing on Facebook, or vice versa. Like, I just wanted to share it, and then my mother-in-law gave me a hard time for sharing it. So like, how do you help families navigate that? My family wants me to do it one way. It doesn't necessarily line up with my value system. And then where's the kid in that question?
I love when people with teenagers say posted with permission. I feel very reassured when I see news about a teenager and it says posted with permission, or even a tween, or, a younger kid, but a kid who's old enough to kind of have thoughts about what's being shared. That just makes me feel like, oh, I don't have to pretend I don't know this information. I don't have to wonder if it's okay, or if I've kind of violated this kid's privacy just by reading their mom's, or dad's update. I think posted with permission is very respectful. So that's, one thing that you can do. I think we all are kind of moving in this direction now with like smaller groups. So thinking about maybe you do have a small group text just with, your siblings, or just with, I have one with just my kids' 3 living grandparents, where we do share pictures. I'm not allowed to share him on, big social, but I can share with the 3 grandparents, and that's okay, if I check. And that's really helpful. So things where we have more control can be good. And then also, especially with college, which has just been so fraught for so many families, I've gotten notes from people, even in my religious community. I got a note a few years ago from one family that I really respect. And it was such a great note saying, like, we appreciate how enthusiastic you all are about like helping us and advising us. And I know you all want our kid to go to your alma mater, and we take that as the love that it is, but like, please back off. It's really stressful for us. Please don't ask them. Please don't ask us. And like, we'll let you know their address when they go in the fall. And if you want to send care packages, like, you'll get their address. But like, please just like, don't ask when we're all at potluck. Don't ask at services. And I thought, yeah. Fair.
Yeah, I love that modeling. That's hard. I think a lot of people struggle with disappointing or just sort of going against the grain a little bit with their friend group or their peer group, even if it is in honor of their kids' boundaries or what's best for their kids, right? I think that can be hard. It probably shouldn't be. It probably should just be like, well, duh, it's best for my kids, so screw the neighbors, or my sister-in-law. But like, I'm not gonna pretend.
It's also hard for you though. And I think a lot of us parents are going to social media, especially in the last 3 years, but even in the last 10 years, because parenting can be so isolating, for the support of our peers and for the connection and learning from our peers as well.
Mhm.
And I think we can balance that. So with something like college, where your kid's privacy is really at stake, maybe you have like one bestie in another city who's like going through it as well. And like you pick that person and like you just disclose everything, like the thing your kid wrote in the essay that you're not sure they really should have written about, or whatever it is, the thing that's stressing you out about money, because this process is incredibly fraught financially for families,
Right.
and that can be hard to talk about, like all those things, or your therapist or your co-parent. But it might be nice if it's someone like outside of your main orbit, and then you keep it private. And with kids with special needs, for example, where there's sometimes a lot of disclosure to get support, and I recognize that, for example, like Facebook groups are tremendous well of support in some cases for families. I think if there's times where you need to ask a question anonymously, does the group allow for that? Is that an option? Because things can be tracked later. And I do think an answer, but it's worth thinking about, like, is the information I'm getting an experiment?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that anyone should feel bad about with our kids' rights to be a separate human being, and try to figure out how we can get those needs met, without exposing them too much.
Yeah, I love that. So I feel like, if I had to kind of wrap up everything you're saying into, I don't know, a thesis, you're telling us over and over in these different settings that our job is to help our kids really develop a conscience, and then turn to their own conscience for guidance, right? And some of the things that we fall back on reflexively or habitually, or because they're available to us, as an app, there's sort of workarounds, but they kind of get in the way of helping our kids develop that conscience and us talking to them about that.
And figuring out their own identities. And one of the things that I struggle with in my own life, even like having just published another book, like, there's all this pressure to like get followers. And if we can talk to our kids about the difference between meaningful reciprocal relationships versus followers, for example, and make sure that we can even laugh at ourselves, when I've gotten all caught up in followers or in numbers a couple of times, may have happened to me, like I kind of invite my 14-year-old to not like laugh at me in a cruel way but be like, oh my gosh, like, I'm just all over my Amazon numbers again, like help. And like turn to my high schooler and he's like, you're more important than your numbers, mom. And I'm like, thank you. So it's like let your kids be those sages of wisdom.
Yeah.
And also just recognize that we all want to be followed and regarded and seen and liked, right? So I mean, that social media isn't duping us, right? We all want those things, and the designers of it really get what makes us human.
Yeah. And our kids are the same actual species as us, right? We're humans, they're humans. It's it's not quite the mystery that it can feel like sometimes.
Here I am popping in.
Hi, Lonnie.
Great conversation, very sparky, very quick, sparking a lot of appreciation from people who are watching. Great content. I want to make two quick announcements, or one is a question then that I want to get to that someone has asked here. And then Anne-Marie is going to pop a commercial in chat for your newsletter, because my guess is some of the answers might be here. This person wanted to know. She wanted to know, is there a way to get Devorah's most meaningful sound bites or tips or easily shared content And then she put in quotes, focus on character, not consequences, would be great to share with my local parents' digital community. This is from Allison, who's watching tonight. We did put in the link just here right now. Sign up for Devorah's newsletter. Do you have anything else that you want to add to that? Is there other sources where people can get that Heitner at a glance thing that they're seeking?
I've done a bunch of podcasts and other things this fall, and there are also some articles that I've written and that other folks have written about the book. But in the newsletter, just to do a little plug for the newsletter, there is a really nice comic that summarizes some of those ideas that I had someone draw after, one of those like nice sketch notes. So, and I love sketch notes. I'm a big fan. So it does, I think, have, character over consequences and mentoring over monitoring as a few of the Heitner phrases.
Yeah, I do appreciate that.